In the winter of 1956, a newly married couple moved into a lonely house on the coast of Maine. They had been married for exactly 8 days. 8 days of laughter, 8 days of plans. 8 days of believing their life together had only just begun. But on the very first night in that house, someone else was already there. Not a neighbor, not a visitor. Something that had been waiting in that house for more than 70 years. Waiting for them. And before the month was over, the couple would learn a terrifying truth about the presence sharing their home. She had a purpose. What that purpose was would take them weeks to understand. And the answer, when it finally came, would change everything. Thomas and Eleanor were young, 26 and 24. They had met in Boston after the war ended, married in a small church ceremony, and decided to begin their life somewhere quieter than the city. Eleanor had always loved the ocean. As a little girl, her grandmother had taken her to the coast of Massachusetts every summer. She remembered standing at the shoreline, letting the cold Atlantic foam wash over her bare feet, feeling something vast and ancient pressing against the edges of the world. She had always believed the sea had a memory. She just never imagined it would remember her back. That was how they found the house. It sat alone on a rocky stretch of coastline outside a tiny Maine fishing town. Behind the house stood an abandoned lighthouse. Its great glass lantern was dark, its iron stairs rusting. Its keeper is long gone, and the rent was surprisingly cheap. The old fisherman who owned it simply shrugged when Thomas asked why.
The last tenants moved away quick,
He said, looking out toward the water. Thomas laughed.
Haunted?
The fisherman didn't laugh back. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said,
Yes, something like that.
He hesitated again, then added quietly,
People around here say the lighthouse keeper's wife never really left.
But newlyweds rarely listen to warnings. And that night, the Whitakers moved in. They ate dinner by candlelight because the electricity kept flickering. They told each other it was just old wiring. They told each other the groaning sounds from the upper hallway were just the house settling in the cold. They held hands across the table and smiled. They would look back on that fisherman's warning many times in the weeks that followed. But by then, it would be far too late to simply walk away. The first strange thing happened 3 nights later. Eleanor had gone to bed early that evening. She had been unusually tired lately, more than she could account for. She fell asleep quickly, and then, just after midnight, she woke. She lay still in the dark, listening. At first, she thought the sound was the wind. But this was different. This sound had weight, it had direction. Footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate, walking across the wooden floor of the hallway just outside their bedroom door. Eleanor didn't move. She told herself it was the house. The footsteps stopped, directly outside their bedroom door. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. A knock. 3 taps. Gentle. Almost polite. Thomas was fully awake now. He got out of bed and opened the door. The hallway was empty. He stepped out and looked in both directions. Nothing. No one. But the air felt wrong. Cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. It was a deep cold, a still cold. At the far end of the hallway, a door that they had closed earlier that evening was now standing. Wide open, the door to the attic. Over the next week, the strange things continued. Lights flickered without cause. Doors drifted open. Once, Eleanor swore she smelled sea salt in the middle of the kitchen, thick and briny. One night, Eleanor stood alone in the kitchen drinking tea. She heard it, a distant metallic sound. Faint, she stepped to the window and looked toward the lighthouse. For a moment she thought she heard metal scraping slowly against stone. Then one night, they both saw her. Thomas was coming down the stairs when he froze. Standing near the window was a woman. She wore a long white dress that looked decades out of fashion. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. Her skin looked pale, almost luminous, and she was staring out toward the lighthouse. Thomas whispered,
"Eleanor?"
and then the woman was gone. Gone like a candle being snuffed. The next morning, she was the one who noticed it. The window had fogged over in the night, and on that foggy glass, 3 words had been written from the inside: "Beware the stairs." Thomas and Eleanor had lived in the house for less than 2 weeks. They had heard footsteps with no source. They had seen a woman who could not exist. And now a ghost had left them a message. One question circled through their minds. Why would a woman who had been dead for over 70 years care about their safety? That night, Thomas and Eleanor found an old trunk in the attic containing yellowed newspapers and photographs of Margaret, the lighthouse keeper's wife. They learned that her husband had gone to sea during a storm and never returned. Margaret waited for 47 days, but she didn't die from grief. She died falling down the old, rotting stairs that her husband never fixed. Later that evening, long after supper, Eleanor stood alone at the living room window. She had turned the lights off. She wanted to be still. She looked out at the lighthouse and she thought about Margaret, a woman who had died in this place, a woman who had been forgotten for 70 years, a woman who had, somehow, stayed, not out of anger, not out of grief, but out of something that looked, from where Eleanor stood, very much like love. She pressed her hand gently against the cold glass. And then for just a moment, a soft golden light bloomed inside the lantern room of the lighthouse. The beam turned slowly across the dark Atlantic. Water just once like a watchful eye opening after a very long sleep. Then the light faded. The tower returned to darkness. The ghost of Margaret was never seen again. Some ghosts return to haunt the living. Others return for a very different reason. Sometimes they come back to make sure life goes on.